know that feeling when someone expects you to bend, to give, to sacrifice, and they have no idea what it costs you? That was me, sitting on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling, my heart pounding, as I realized my life had turned into a battlefield I didn't choose. Before we dive into this, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and stay with me till the end, because what I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, empowerment. I grew up the quiet one, the responsible one, the sister who never raised her voice, who always smiled even when things were hard. My younger sister, however, was different. Loud, demanding, always expecting the world to revolve around her. She had married young, found comfort in a man who adored her, and then, one day they moved into our parents' house, not just for a visit. Not for a week, permanently. And that's when everything changed. At first, I tried to be gracious. I told myself they are family. This is temporary. We'll make it work. But I soon realized that their expectations had no limit. They weren't content with sharing space. They wanted control, influence, and more than anything, my compliance. It started with small things. They rearranged my childhood bedroom, claimed my favorite spots in the living room, criticized the meals our mother cooked. Then came the impossible request, one that made my stomach churn and my chest tighten every time I thought about it. They demanded that I financially support them, not occasionally, not out of goodwill, but as if it were my duty. My sister, her eyes full of entitlement, leaned back on the couch, sipping her coffee, as if it were a performance I was meant to applaud, and said, "It's only fair. You earn more. You should help." I froze. The words weren't just selfish. They were invasive, suffocating. I had worked hard for years, building my life, saving, struggling, dreaming of stability. And here they were, asking me to hand over pieces of it, expecting obedience without gratitude. At first, I tried to reason with them gently. I explained my own responsibilities, my own bills, my own limits. My words fell on deaf ears. My parents, who had always been mediators, seemed paralyzed, unwilling or afraid to take sides, silently hoping the storm would pass. Days turned into weeks. Every interaction became a test, every visit, a negotiation. They would sit at the dinner table, subtly shaming me, making comments about generosity, duty, family loyalty. And when I finally said no, clearly, firmly, without hesitation, my sister's smile disappeared. Her husband looked at me with disbelief, as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. I remember that evening vividly. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, trying to calm my own racing thoughts. My sister came up behind me, her voice sharp, slicing through the air like a knife. "You think you're better than us? You think you can refuse what's rightfully ours?" I didn't respond immediately. I put down the knife, wiped my hands, and looked at her. Not with anger, not with fear, but with clarity. "No," I said simply. "I will not give you what is mine. And this ends here." She laughed then. A hollow, cruel laugh that echoed through the kitchen. Her husband joined in, a smug, satisfied sound that made my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to run, to collapse under the weight of their audacity, but instead, I stood taller. It was in that moment I realized something vital. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be broken. The weeks that followed were tense. My parents tried to mediate, but I remained firm. I stopped entertaining their subtle digs, their passive-aggressive remarks, their manipulations. I focused on my own life, my work, my dreams. I remembered the girl I once was, shy, pliable, always accommodating, and I let her go. Slowly, I began to reclaim my space. I decorated my room exactly how I wanted. I took back my favorite chair in the living room. I started saving and investing, planning for a future that would be untouchable by anyone else's whims. And then came the poetic justice, subtle, quiet, yet so satisfying. My sister and her husband had grown accustomed to living off others, depending on convenience and entitlement. But my refusal forced them to confront their own inadequacies. Without my compliance, they realized the world wasn't bending to them. They had to face reality, face their own limitations, and ultimately, It changed the dynamic completely. I won't lie. It was lonely at times. Standing firm against family isn't easy, but with every small victory I grew stronger. I learned to respect myself, to honor my boundaries, to see that love doesn't mean surrender. My sister, I later learned, tried to sow discord among our relatives, telling tales of my supposed cruelty, hoping someone would pressure me into submission. But by then, I had discovered a powerful truth. People who respect you cannot be manipulated by others' lies, and those who try to control you are powerless if you stand unshaken. Months passed. My parents began to see the change in me. They witnessed the woman who refused to bend for selfishness, who stood firm without malice. And slowly, they began to support me, not because I demanded it, but because my resolve inspired them. Eventually, my sister and her husband moved out. Not because of drama or confrontation, but because my unwavering stance left no room for their entitlement. They couldn't bully, manipulate, or exploit me. My boundaries were clear, and they were forced to either accept them or leave, and they left. I remember the day they walked out, the quiet slamming of the door, the relief in the air, the feeling that for the first time in months, I could breathe again. There was no gloating, no celebration, just peace. Pure, undisturbed peace. I stood by the window that evening, watching the sunset, feeling the weight of every tense moment lift off my shoulders. I realized then that empowerment isn't about revenge. It isn't about making someone feel small or regretful. It's about reclaiming your own life, your own choices, and finding the calm strength that no one can take away. Looking back now, I understand that this experience shaped me profoundly. It taught me that being generous doesn't mean being submissive. That family isn't about blind obedience. That real strength comes from standing up for yourself, quietly, firmly, without apology. I live in my own space now, surrounded by the life I built, a life no one else can intrude upon. My parents are proud, my sister has learned boundaries the hard way, and I've found an inner peace that's worth more than any approval or compliance I could have offered. And as I sit here, sharing this story with you, I hope you take away one thing. Your life belongs to you. Your boundaries matter, and refusing to be exploited is not cruelty, it's courage. After that first wave of confrontation, life didn't suddenly become easy. In fact, it got harder for a while. Standing firm against my sister and her husband had made them furious, and they were not subtle in their tactics. There were whispers behind my back, passive-aggressive comments during family dinners, and countless friendly suggestions from relatives urging me to give in. I remember one evening vividly. I had just returned home from work, exhausted, my mind still running through deadlines, emails, and meetings. My sister was lounging in the living room, her husband at her side, both wearing that infuriating look of entitlement. "Maybe you should reconsider. You know," she said lightly, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "It's only fair. You earn more, live comfortably. Why make it so hard on everyone else?" I stopped in my tracks, my hand frozen on the doorknob. For a brief moment, the old familiar fear rose in my chest, the fear of conflict, of rejection, of being perceived as selfish. But then I remembered the strength I had found in the kitchen weeks ago, the woman who refused to bend, the woman who had faced their anger without flinching. I took a deep breath and spoke softly but firmly. "I've already made my decision. My life, my earnings, my space, these are not up for negotiation." "That's the boundary," her husband snorted. "Boundaries, really? You think a little boundary is going to solve everything?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My silence spoke louder than any argument I could have made. I turned and walked toward my room, leaving them to stew in their frustration. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on how much I had changed in such a short time. The fear, the doubt, the endless need to appease everyone, it was all fading. I was beginning to understand something crucial. My life did not belong to anyone else, not even my family. My generosity had limits, and my worth was not dictated by anyone's expectations. The following days were a test of endurance. My sister tried to provoke me with small manipulations. She would accidentally leave her belongings in my room, insist on borrowing things without permission, or make snide comments about how difficult I was being. Her husband tried a different approach, subtle guilt-tripping, implying that my refusal was harming the family's harmony. At first, I felt the tension clawing at me. I wanted to snap, to yell, to force them to understand. But I realized that reacting would give them power, so I learned to observe instead, to stay calm, to let my inner strength guide me. I started dedicating more time to my own passions, my work, my hobbies. I joined a painting class I had long wanted to attend, something just for me. Each brushstroke became a reminder of control over my own life. Each hour I spent on myself reinforced the notion that I could be happy without bending to their will. One evening, as I worked on a canvas, my mother entered the room. She watched me quietly for a long moment, her eyes soft but cautious. "I didn't realize how much this was affecting you," she said. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "It wasn't just about refusing them," I said. "It's about realizing that I can't let anyone treat me as less than I am. Not my sister, not her husband, not even family expectations." My mother smiled faintly. "I think you're teaching all of us something important. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, consistent, unyielding." That affirmation, simple as it was, strengthened me. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. My sister was relentless, and her husband wasn't far behind. But I had discovered a power within myself that could not be shaken by anger or entitlement. Weeks turned into months. My sister and her husband realized that their usual tactics weren't working. Their attempts at manipulation met only calm firmness. They began to complain less, subtly at first, and then more overtly, as they realized they could not bend me to their will. I started noticing small shifts in the family dynamic. My parents stopped trying to mediate every argument, choosing instead to respect my choices. My sister, frustrated by her lack of influence, began to withdraw into her own world, seeking validation elsewhere. Her husband, once smug and overconfident, became quieter, less confrontational, almost humbled in his interactions with me. The real turning point came during a family gathering. My sister attempted to pressure me again in front of relatives, insisting I contribute to a shared expense for a project she and her husband wanted. I calmly explained my stance, my voice steady, unwavering. I didn't argue, I didn't apologize. I simply stated my boundaries and left it at that. For the first time, my sister's husband didn't scoff or mock. He said nothing. The room fell into a hush. And in that silence, I realized the subtle revenge of strength, the satisfaction of standing firm, not through anger, but through unwavering self-respect. From that day on, life shifted. My sister and her husband began to adjust. Some might call it grudging respect. Others might say they finally understood their limits. I had not changed them with arguments or manipulation. I had changed the dynamic simply by standing my ground, and I began to flourish in ways I hadn't anticipated. My confidence grew, my career advanced, my relationships deepened with honesty and authenticity. I discovered joy in my independence, in my ability to protect my space and my values without apology. Through all of this, I learned a profound lesson. True empowerment isn't about dominating others. It's about reclaiming yourself, your life, and your peace, regardless of how others react. My sister and her husband eventually moved out, not in defeat, but because the environment they thrived in, one of entitlement and manipulation, no longer existed. Their departure was quiet, unremarkable, but in that quiet, I felt a liberation that words cannot fully capture. Standing alone in the house that night, I realized I had not only defended my boundaries, but had discovered a version of myself I had long ignored. Resilient, self-assured, and free, and in that freedom, I found the kind of peace that no one can take away. The kind of victory that isn't celebrated with applause, but with a quiet, lasting satisfaction that comes from knowing you stood your ground, held your dignity, and protected your life. After months of tension and subtle battles, the household began to breathe differently. My sister and her husband had stopped trying to provoke me openly, yet the air remained heavy with unspoken resentment. I realized that true change doesn't happen overnight, and respect, once earned, is often slow to settle into people's hearts. I devoted myself more fully to my own life. Work became my sanctuary, not just a job, but a way to build a future on my own terms. I traveled for the first time in years, exploring places I had only dreamed about, and found joy in solitude. I began hosting small gatherings for friends who uplifted me rather than drained me, slowly building a world that celebrated authenticity rather than entitlement. Even with all these changes, the shadow of my sister's presence lingered. She would occasionally try to draw me into arguments with pointed remarks during family dinners, or passive-aggressive complaints that I wasn't contributing enough to family unity. But each time, I remained calm, letting her words float past me without gripping my peace. I learned the power of silence and observation, realizing that reacting only gives others fuel, and I had decided long ago to refuse it. One evening, my parents called me into the living room. My sister and her husband were out. They sat quietly, hands clasped, and my mother spoke first. "We've been thinking. We should have seen sooner. You've handled everything with such grace. We're proud of you." I blinked back tears. For so long, I had been caught between guilt and obligation, torn between family expectations and my own boundaries. Their words, simple as they were, felt like sunlight breaking through a long, stormy sky. It was in that quiet moment that I truly understood the full arc of my journey. I hadn't just defended my finances, my space, or my possessions. I had defended my very sense of self. I had discovered the power of saying no without apology, of standing firm without malice, of valuing my worth over everyone else's comfort. The next weeks brought an unexpected development. My sister, frustrated and unable to manipulate, began to confront her own mistakes. I overheard her conversations with her husband, their voices low, filled with reflection and realization. It was not the vengeance I had imagined. There was no celebration in seeing them humbled, but it was quiet justice. Their awareness of my steadfastness and refusal to yield had shifted their perspective. With their subtle retreat, I found more room to grow, to reclaim experiences that had been overshadowed by their presence. I redecorated the house, transformed my living space into a sanctuary, and even opened up my heart to new friendships and possibilities I had neglected for years. Each step forward was a small act of triumph, a reclamation of my own narrative. Looking back now, I can see the transformation clearly. The woman who once feared confrontation, who cringed at the thought of angering others, had become someone resilient, empowered, and whole. I had learned that true strength isn't about dominating others or exacting revenge. It's about nurturing your inner life so deeply that no one else's actions can destabilize it. My parents, once hesitant, now supported me openly. They admired the calm yet unyielding courage I had shown. My sister and her husband moved on in their own lives, carrying with them the lessons they had been unwilling to accept before, and I remained unshaken. A quiet force of self-respect and dignity. I often reflect on those months now, remembering the sleepless nights, the tense meals and the silent battles. They were painful, yes, but they were necessary. They forged a version of me that I never knew existed, someone capable of holding space for herself, even when others demanded surrender. If there is one message I want to leave with you, it is this: your life, your boundaries, and your peace are invaluable. Standing firm may feel isolating at times, but it is also the path to self-discovery, empowerment, and true freedom. No one can give it to you. You must claim it for yourself. And so, as I sit here sharing my story, I feel not anger, not bitterness, but profound peace. I know that my life is mine alone, and that is the greatest victory of all.